Over the past week or two, Naotoshi Shida has been taking and answering questions on Twitter, and they've not only been remarkably insightful, but they've also brought about some pretty major revelations with regards to his career. His answers have been quite short, so I thought it'd be helpful to go through the most interesting ones and provide some context and analysis in this video. Full disclosure, he responds through Google Translate to English questions, so I've tidied up some of his responses for the sake of clarity, and any Japanese questions and answers have been translated. I've combined a few and restructured everything so that it hopefully builds a bit of an easy to follow picture about him. So let's start with the questions that cover his earliest years as an animator. The first one comes in asking, how did you become an animator? Shida says, since I didn't go to a specialized school, I first entered as an apprentice at a small company through a magazine's recruitment advertisement. When asked if it's hard to join the industry without going to art school, he said that he gradually learnt along the way. Another question follows up with, what was the first piece of animation you ever worked on? And he said, I drew a cloud in the TV show Miyuki. This tells us that he began animating in 1983, and the studio that he most likely joined was Kitty Mitaka Studio, who handled the animation for the Miyuki TV series. It's possible that he may have been part of a studio that the company outsourced to, but since he's not credited in any way, it's impossible to say for sure. Another user asks, which animators influenced you? And he says that Kazuhide Tominaga is his biggest influence, and he knew he wanted to be an animator the first time he saw Tominaga's car chase in Lupin III's Castle of Cagliostro. This film first came out in 1979, so it's interesting to hear that in the span of a few years, he was finally able to do what he set out to. Tominaga's a huge name within the Lupin franchise, but he's also known for some of his work on Studio Ghibli's Laputa Castle in the Sky. Stylistically, they couldn't be more different, so it's interesting to see that Shida's taste seemed to stretch far outside of his personal work. This is pretty evident in other questions. A couple of people asked him what he thought of Naoki Tate, for example, and he said that while he doesn't animate in this way himself, he thinks Tate is a wonderful animator with a unique touch. We know by 1986, Shida moved on to Studio Last House and was working under Masayuki Uchiyama on Dragon Ball, so it sounds like within the span of about 3 years or so, he was already working as a key animator. For someone with no prior education in the field, to enter into the industry and progress so fast is seriously impressive. Someone asked him how was Masayuki Uchiyama as a teacher. Shida said he was a very sensitive and kind teacher who, had I not met, I don't think I would have continued being an animator. I really love this answer because I think it speaks volumes about being able to separate the art from the artist. Uchiyama is one of the least popular supervisors on Z thanks to his rather unrefined style and tendency to heavily correct work, sometimes for the worse. To hear that he was such a positive influence on Shida is really nice to hear. We've got a great bunch of questions regarding his work on Z, so let's make our way through some of those. He was asked who's his favourite director that he's ever worked with, and he answered that it was Daisuke Nishio. Nishio was the overall series director from Z and directed many episodes of the series himself. He's also been a part of One Piece in smaller capacities and was the series director of 2 Procure series, both franchises that Shida has worked on pretty extensively over the years. I always enjoy answers like these because they speak volumes about working relationships that span decades at this point. Following on sequentially in his career, the next question asks, what's your favourite scene that you animated in Dragon Ball? He said that it was Goku versus Vegeta, which is pretty vague, but the most likely answer is episode 32 of Z, where Goku takes on the transformed Vegeta. Shida was never credited on any episodes involving the big Majin Vegeta versus Goku fight, so this is the only option unless there's something we're missing. Considering it's such an iconic fight, it's not a totally unreasonable answer. The next question has an absolutely mind-blowing answer though. Can you tell us what led to you working on Studio JUNIO and SHINDO Productions episodes from DBZ 159 onwards? He says, I don't understand it either. It's a mystery why I was put in charge of Trunks cutting Frieza in two. When I first read this, I was just blown away. The iconic moment where Trunks slices Frieza up has historically always been credited to Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, the character designer for the Buu arc and a very prolific animator throughout all of the various Dragon Ball series. Shida isn't even credited on the episode in any form at all, and this is episode 120, long before he swapped studios officially. A simple question answered on Twitter has blown a presumption out of the water that has been in place for about 27 years. I'm still kind of gobsmacked. It's amazing that an animator who only really gained notoriety for his climactic animation post-Dragon Ball was in charge of such an iconic moment. It's great to hear that young talent was being nurtured all the way back then. Toei still do a reasonable job of that nowadays. As a nice transition question, someone asks, what's the difference between working on Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super? To the surprise of nobody at all, Shida answers, Super has a tighter schedule. This has pretty much been a consistent response from animators whenever they're asked about what it's like to work on the series. Someone followed up asking if it's possible to fix the tough time constraints, and he said that while there's several ways, it's very difficult to actually do. Again, this isn't too surprising, it's mostly just confirming what we already knew about the series. He answered quite a few questions about how long it took to do certain scenes in some modern Dragon Ball projects. For his Battle of Gods scene, he said that he can't quite remember exactly how long it took, but it was approximately 2 months. For his scene at the end of Dragon Ball Super Episode 95, Goku vs. Frieza, he said that that was about 2 weeks' work. Considering that was quite a limited sequence with a focus on detailed art over movement, that's definitely a reasonable time frame, especially considering what we know about Shida's speed on the whole. Not Dragon Ball related, but he also said his 4-minute One Piece film Gold scene was also about 2 months' work or so. This one I find a little bit strange because I swear he said it took like 3 to 4 months in the past, but I can't find my source on that, so I might have just made it up. He was asked how long he works, and he said he works about 8 hours a day, including weekends. That's actually a pretty reasonable schedule compared to a lot of animators in the industry. Toei Animation are one of the few studios with a union, so alongside good pay, you're also not forced to work totally unreasonable hours. That said, he certainly doesn't make animating sound much fun. Someone asked him which anime he had the most fun working on, and he said, I never enjoy my work, I always face too many technical difficulties, so there you go. There are also a number of questions I didn't include that ask him about how to get into the industry, and he pretty much answered all of them saying that it's stupidly hard work, and you probably shouldn't bother if you can't hack it, so yeah, nice and motivating. The last question we have about his career here before we head into a series of questions about his personal preferences is about whether he's a freelancer or a Toei Animation employee. Much like the Trunks revelation, this one also shocked me. He says, I'm a freelancer, but I'm currently working at Toei. I've worked elsewhere before, but I'm so busy at Toei that it's not really possible anymore. I'm aware that he's worked on other studios before. He was credited on an episode of Death Note, for example, but he's pretty much exclusively been Toei's big Climax animator for the past 20 years. I was really shocked to hear that he's not actually tied down to the studio. That is a lot of loyalty, so he certainly must be treated very well, both in terms of respect and financially. Okay, lastly, on to some tidbits and preferences. Do you have any plans to animate on Super again? Yes, he has confirmed this many times in the past, and I've mentioned it in other videos. He says, I'm currently coordinating with the staff. I do want to participate again. So there you go. That is 100% set in stone. I imagine we'll probably see him for the tournament's finale. What do you think of Yuya Takahashi's work? Yuya Takahashi, of course, being the guy who's been blowing everyone away with his seriously impressive supervision over the past few months. Shida says, I think he's a wonderful animator who draws with real respect to the original work. This does not surprise me in the slightest, especially considering just how influenced Takahashi is by Shida. He's referenced his work in the past, both in terms of Shida's contemporary and older output. They are certainly two peas in a pod, and I really do hope we get to see them working together again. On the subject of older designs, someone asked, do you prefer MINORU Maeda or Tadayoshi Yamamuro's designs? Shida says he likes Maeda's best out of the two. A similar question, who's your favourite character designer on Dragon Ball? He says that Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru is his favourite. And lastly, no surprise at all here, do you like the modern Dragon Ball designs or the older ones from Z? I like the early designs, he says. This was pretty evident just from seeing how he draws characters these days anyway, but it's nice to hear his opinions reflect what I think a lot of fans also feel. Touching on some specific works here, he was asked, what's your favourite scene out of your own work? He said that it's the scene he did for the first Procure New Stage movie's opening. I'm so glad he picked this. It is one of the most insane scenes he's ever done, particularly the end cut where the dinosaur-looking thing starts rotating. I don't even want to think about how difficult that must have been to animate. Funnily enough, when asked about what was the hardest scene he's ever animated, he pointed to the Procure All-Star Deluxe 2 scene that I've always cited as what I believe to be Shida's best work, so I feel kind of validated. Considering how technical all of this background animation is, it's pretty much self-explanatory as to why it was so difficult to pull off. I do wish we could see more stuff like this from Shida, but it's obviously understandable given how long it must have taken. Lastly, one question for the future. If Toei offered you the role of character designer on Dragon Ball, would you accept it? He says, I'd refuse. If Dragon Ball carries on, it should be created with younger staff at the forefront. And I think that's a wonderful answer. Pushing for young talents to help carry a franchise forward in a fresh direction is so essential, and something I've always personally campaigned for. Either stick with the old or head in a new direction and make sure you do it right. One Piece has always been open to this with films like Movie 6 or the 3D2Y special, so I am 100% entirely all for seeing that approach with Dragon Ball. But that's about all the worthwhile questions he's answered so far, so I hope you enjoyed that. He's still answering questions on Twitter right now, so there may well be a part 2 to this if we get any more huge info bombs. I'll leave a link to his Twitter in the description if you'd like to go and take a look at some of the questions I didn't cover. If you do tweet at him or submit questions, make sure you're polite and you keep things nice and simple. Be sure to rate this video if you found it interesting, subscribe for more analysis on Dragon Ball and its animators, and as always, I will see you next time.